The music and chatter of the party swelled until it was almost unbearable, and then his voice cut through it all like a knife. With a smirk fixed on his face, he raised his glass and shouted the cruelest thing he could think of, a joke aimed straight at me, his ex, the easy target for his amusement. Laughter burst around the room, rolling and multiplying until it felt like every corner echoed with it. Faces blurred together, not with kindness but with hunger, as if humiliation was their chosen entertainment for the night. My cheeks burned, not from shame but from something far sharper. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I let them have their moment, knowing it would be the last one they'd ever laugh so freely at my expense. My silence became a wall they couldn't climb. I smiled, a small, measured smile, the kind that revealed nothing of what churned beneath it. To anyone watching, it must have seemed like I was unfazed, perhaps even indifferent, but stillness can be dangerous. I folded the sting of his insult carefully inside myself, storing it away, pressing it into something useful. While he basked in the glow of his petty triumph, I was already miles ahead of him, seeing an end he couldn't imagine. My calm was not weakness, it was disguise. Every word he had ever spoken, every half-truth I had once believed, replayed in fragments, stitching together a truth I should have seen long ago. Betrayal wasn't a sudden wound, it was one that bled slowly, drop by drop, until the cut ran deep. Tonight's cruelty was not new, just sharper, more public. And instead of despair, it left me with clarity. He wanted me broken, but all he had done was plant a seed, not of sorrow, not of longing, but of resolve. Revenge was no longer an idea. It was a certainty, a quiet breath beneath every thought. So I watched him as the night stretched on. I noticed the arrogance in the tilt of his head, the way he soaked in admiration as if it belonged to him. I caught the small cracks to the way his eyes darted when he thought no one noticed, the restless twitch in his fingers. The crowd saw only his charm, but I saw what lay beneath it. He had made the mistake of underestimating me, and in that blindness, he had already given me the upper hand. My movements were deliberate, my glances calculated, and though I seemed to fade into the background, every second was another piece of a silent countdown only I could hear. The plan was not ready, not yet, but it was forming with every beat of my heart, and then there was the gift. It sat in the corner, wrapped in silver paper and tied with a ribbon, untouched and unnoticed by most. To them it was nothing, another decoration among many. To me, it was everything, the key to what was coming. No one else knew what waited inside. No one guessed the weight it carried. I had chosen it with precision, wrapped it with care, placed it deliberately in his path. When the time came, that simple box would change the air in the room. Until then, it would sit silently, biding its time, much like me. And just like me, it would be patient, waiting for the moment when all laughter would finally die in their throats. Some people moved through life reacting, others calculating. She was the latter. Even in her quietest moments, her thoughts threaded themselves into patterns, weaving solutions layered upon contingencies. Friends had once teased her for overthinking, for seeing two moves ahead when most could barely see one. But that same mind, built on patience and precision, was her sharpest weapon. She never acted without reason, never revealed more than she intended. Those who mistook her calm for weakness had no idea how dangerous it could be. Ethan, of course, thrived on being underestimated by no one. His charm had a gravity to it, drawing people in like moths to a flame. He carried himself with the polished ease of a man convinced that admiration was his birthright. At first, she had been no exception. His words could light up a room, his laughter commanded attention, and his eyes promised both safety and adventure. But what dazzled from afar felt suffocating up close. Beneath that flawless surface was a grip that tightened slowly, deliberately, never enough to accuse, but always enough to remind her that he held control. It began with remarks that seemed too small to matter. A comment about her voice, disguised as playful. A dig at her career ambitions, brushed off as just being honest. Each one slipped beneath her skin like a splinter too minor to call out, too sharp to ignore. At gatherings, he would place a hand on her shoulder, cutting her off with a smile that others mistook for affection. When she pulled back, he leaned close and whispered, "Relax, it's just a joke." The red flags weren't loud. They were whispered, threaded through her days until she began to wonder if her unease was her fault. The breaking point came not as a scream, but like glass shattering. In silence, a message on his phone, meant for someone else. Words of tenderness and laughter he had never spared for her. Promises she had once clung to, now handed carelessly to another. Betrayal isn't always the act, it's the confirmation of what you already know. In that moment, clarity seared through her. Ethan hadn't merely wounded her pride, he had built his own confidence on her restraint. Every triumphant smirk he wore had been paid for by her silence. But silence, she decided that night, would serve her again. Not as surrender, as strategy. Once freed from illusion, she saw Ethan clearly. The smile that once charmed now looked stretched thin, hungry. His arrogance was not strength, but desperation and endless need to be admired, validated, envied. He thrived on making others feel small, because only then could he feel tall. To the world, he gleamed gold. To her, he was paper thin. And she knew precisely where to tear. The perfect opportunity presented itself at a party that seemed made for him. Lights, music, laughter, it was Ethan's natural stage. He worked the room with the ease of someone addicted to attention, his voice weaving stories polished to draw admiration. People leaned in, orbiting him like planets around a sun that demanded to shine. She lingered nearby, her silence blending into the background, her eyes steady on him. To anyone else, she looked subdued, perhaps even broken. But silence, when wielded with purpose, cuts deeper than any words. When Ethan's gaze landed on her, his smile sharpened. He made her the subject of his jokes, expecting compliance, the same smile and shrug she had given before. But this time, she answered only with a look, a small, knowing smile that carried weight he couldn't decipher. The unease flickered across his face before he buried it in laughter, louder, sharper, trying to drown the crack she had opened. The crowd didn't notice, but she did. And cracks have a way of spreading once they begin. By the night's end, Ethan stood triumphant in his own eyes. He was louder, prouder, convinced that he had reduced her to nothing. In front of everyone, he had no idea that in the shadows where laughter faded, she was carrying something invisible to him, a promise. Not shouted, not revealed, but whispered within herself with the kind of certainty that cannot be broken. Tonight was not his victory. Tonight was the quiet beginning of his ruin. And when the reckoning came, Ethan would never see it until it was already too late, because revenge, she knew, was not taken in anger. It was delivered in silence, dressed in patience, and timed so perfectly that the victim never recognized the noose tightening until they could no longer breathe. Ethan's mask of perfection had begun to slip, and she would be the one to rip it away in front of the very audience he lived to impress. Her silence had always been his weapon against her. Soon, it would become her blade against him. He never noticed the way her eyes followed him, quiet, steady, unflinching. From the edges of the room, she observed Ethan's every gesture, every arrogant tilt of his chin, the careless way he commanded attention. The crowd saw confidence, but she saw something else. A pattern forming, threads of deceit woven into his charm. His arrogance wasn't merely annoying. It was a map, and she was tracing it with meticulous care. Each laugh he drew from the audience, each exaggerated story, confirmed what she already knew. Ethan's power was borrowed, his glory built on illusions. Her silence carried her backward, pulling echoes of the past into the present. Small memories resurfaced, flashing sharp as glass. The time he joked about her not being good enough for her own promotion. The way he had dismissed her opinions in front of friends, making her doubt her own intelligence. The late nights he claimed to be working when his phone was turned face down on the table. At the time, she had explained these things away, excused them as flaws. But now they aligned into a pattern she could no longer deny. Every red flag she had ignored stitched itself into a tapestry of betrayal, and the picture was devastatingly clear. Ethan had never loved her. He had only loved control. The deeper she dug, the more his mask cracked. What began as suspicion unfolded into discovery: bank transfers hidden under different names, debts tucked away in forgotten accounts, a trail of fraud disguised behind that perfect smile. He was more than a liar. He was a thief, a parasite, living off the trust of others. His charisma had always been his camouflage, and for years it had worked. But masks wear thin when worn too long, and she was peeling his apart piece by piece. Evidence became her arsenal. Every screenshot, every email, every hushed recording tucked neatly into a private ledger. With each new piece, she felt the balance shift. He thought he was untouchable, but she was building something undeniable, something that would strip him of every shield he had ever worn. It wasn't just about proving his crimes, it was about using his own arrogance against him. When the time came, he wouldn't just be exposed. He would be destroyed by the very lies he thought protected him, and though the pain of betrayal cut deep, she refused to let it hollow her out. Each scar became fuel, each sleepless night a reminder of why she couldn't afford to falter. Her heartbreak hardened into resolve, sharp and unyielding. Ethan believed she was broken. That was his fatal mistake, because broken hearts do not plot with such precision. Only hearts that have chosen power over despair can remain this calm, this focused, this deadly. The celebration that followed was Ethan's stage, his chance to gloat and perform. He laughed louder, mocked sharper, dismissing her with cruel confidence. To the crowd, it looked like victory, him triumphant, her subdued. But beneath the noise, something darker stirred. His overconfidence blinded him, made him reckless. Every insult he threw only tightened the trap she had set. Though he remained blissfully unaware, in the corner of the room, almost invisible among the decorations, sat a small, wrapped box. Silver paper, a crimson ribbon tied in a perfect bow. To everyone else, it was nothing but a gift, another ornament in the sea of excess. But to her, it was the embodiment of patience, of months spent gathering threads into a single knot. The box was not a symbol of celebration. It was a reckoning, waiting silently in plain sight. As Ethan raised his glass and the crowd cheered, her gaze drifted once more to that ribbon. It was more than wrapping, it was resolve bound tight, a promise that could not be undone. The strike was coming, and when it landed, it would not be loud or messy. It would be clean, precise, and final. Ethan thought tonight belonged to him, but the truth lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to unravel. He had mocked her silence, but silence was what would end him. The glass in Ethan's hand gleamed under the lights as he raised it high, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "Here's to upgrades," he said with a grin sharp enough to wound. The crowd chuckled, unsure if they should laugh, but Ethan's eyes found hers, locking on with a cruelty only she could fully feel. The room held its breath as the meaning sank in. She was the thing he had upgraded from, discarded with a joke polished for entertainment. Her face betrayed nothing, but inside, the words carved into her resolve. Every eye turned to her, waiting for a reaction, but she gave them silence. She would not give Ethan the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. He basked in their hesitant laughter, mistaking silence for victory. Emboldened, he launched into another performance, bragging about his newest success. "Fortune favors the bold," he declared, detailing the wealth he claimed to have built on smart investments and sharp instincts. His words were dripping with pride, but to her, every boast was a confession. She knew where those riches truly came from: the forged documents, the stolen accounts, the money funneled through lies. Months of careful work had revealed the truth hidden beneath his glittering surface, and now he flaunted it openly, blind to the fact that every word he spoke tightened the noose around his neck. As his voice swelled with self-congratulation, her calm sharpened into clarity. For the first time, his arrogance and her evidence aligned perfectly. Every file she had saved, every recording she had hidden away, every slip of his tongue she had collected, it all converged here, in this moment. The opportunity she had been waiting for didn't need to be created. Ethan, in his vanity, had delivered it himself. All she had to do was open the door and let him walk into his own ruin. The door came in the form of a small, wrapped box that had been waiting all evening, quietly resting in the corner. Ethan's eyes, drawn to it by the murmurs of the guests, lit with curiosity. "What's this?" he asked, his voice carrying a mix of suspicion and smugness. Someone urged him to open it, laughter edging the air. He played along, pulling the package forward with a theatrical flourish, believing it to be yet another prop in his endless stage show. He had no idea that the gift in his hands wasn't meant to celebrate him, but to end him. The room seemed to inhale all at once as he tugged at the ribbon. Conversations stilled, glasses were lowered, even the air felt charged, as though everyone present sensed something shifting but couldn't name it. The crinkle of paper echoed louder than it should have, each tear amplifying the tension coiled in the space. The laughter that had once flowed so freely now faltered, caught in the collective anticipation of a secret waiting to be revealed. Ethan, of course, mistook their silence for admiration. His grin widened, smug and self-assured. He thrived on their attention, feeding off the suspense he thought he created. "Don't look so nervous," he teased, glancing at her with the same mockery that had colored his toast. "It's just a gift, right?" His arrogance blinded him to the truth. He was performing his final act, and the audience didn't yet know whether to cheer or recoil. The first shred of paper fell away, and with it came the beginning of the end. Nestled inside was not a trinket, not a token of affection or jest, but documents, evidence undeniable and damning. Bank records, transfers, proof of fraud carefully arranged for all to see. His smirk faltered, his hands stiffening as he thumbed through the pages. A hush rippled through the crowd as realization spread, their whispers carrying disbelief and shock. For Ethan, the stage he had built so carefully was collapsing beneath him, and he couldn't laugh it away. She watched as his expression shifted, the grin that had once seemed unshakable faltering under the weight of truth. For the first time, his eyes betrayed fear. The smile he had worn so confidently, the smile that had mocked, belittled, and deceived it began to fade. And as it slipped from his face, she knew it would never return. His downfall had been set in motion, not with rage, not with shouting, but with silence, patience, and precision. He had raised a glass to mock her, but tonight she raised something stronger, his own lies, turned into his destruction. The ribbon slipped through Ethan's fingers with a lazy tug, and the paper gave way beneath his hands. The crowd leaned in, expecting a trinket, a token, something to inflate his already bloated ego. But as the box opened, silence spread like smoke. His eyes, once sharp with arrogance, froze on the contents. The smile that had carried him through. Every lie faltered, just slightly, but enough for her to see it. He sifted through the pages, each one a mirror reflecting his sins back at him. Bank transfers he had forged, contracts falsified, private messages that betrayed not only her but everyone who had ever trusted him. The gift he thought would flatter his pride now clawed at his mask, exposing the man beneath. The evidence was undeniable, raw in its simplicity. Numbers that could not be argued, signatures impossible to explain away, screenshots that revealed not cleverness but cowardice. Cheating, fraud, deception laid out in a neat, merciless stack. Every page was a wound, not to his body but to the illusion he had so carefully built. For years, Ethan had survived on charm and manipulation, weaving lies until even he believed them. Tonight, those lies had been stripped bare in the brightest possible light, leaving nowhere to hide. His smirk dissolved, the confidence he wore like armor crumbling in seconds. The transformation was slow enough for all to witness but fast enough to sting. The crowd, who had once leaned toward him, now recoiled as though from a flame. He blinked hard, forcing the grin back, but it refused to stay. His eyes darted, searching for allies, but found only silence. The man who had mocked her with his cruel toast now stood exposed, stripped of the superiority that had always been his weapon. The air shifted, heavy and sharp, as whispers rippled through the room. Gasps, muted exclamations, and the low hum of betrayal filled the space like a storm breaking. Friends exchanged uncertain glances. Colleagues frowned, their faith collapsing. Even family members turned cold, eyes narrowing with disgust. The weight of betrayal was not hers alone to carry. Anymore, it was shared by everyone present. Every whisper was another thread snapping, every gasp a nail sealing the coffin of his carefully crafted persona. Desperation cracked his voice as he fumbled for words. "This is fake," he stammered, his hands trembling as he tossed the papers back into the box. "All of it is forged," some sick joke, but the words rang hollow, stripped of the conviction he once commanded so easily. He clawed at excuses, tripping over his own panic, his arrogance shed like a skin he could no longer wear. Fear made him small, and every denial only deepened the silence pressing in around him. Through the chaos, she remained still, her calm sharper than his flailing. Inside, her thoughts unfolded like measured steps. This was justice not loud, not violent, but quiet and precise. She had not needed to raise her voice, nor had she needed to gloat. The truth spoke louder than any words she could offer, and her silence was more powerful than any accusation. She had become the narrator of this downfall, not by speaking, but by letting the stage collapse on its own. The crowd turned on him without words of their own. Every glance, every whisper, every shake of a head cut deeper than the evidence itself. Shame flooded the room, not hers but his, soaking into his skin until it clung like a second layer. Laughter no longer belonged to him. It had been replaced by scorn. The humiliation was complete, and the witnesses to his unraveling ensured it would never be forgotten. And then, finally, the collapse began. The man who once towered over others with arrogance now seemed small, his shoulders slumped, his hands trembling, his voice stripped to a whimper. Power had left him, dignity drained away, and all that remained was a hollow shell of the man he had pretended to be. His empire of lies, once built so confidently, reduced itself to rubble and silence. He was powerless, and everyone knew it. She watched, not with glee but with finality. Revenge was not about spectacle. It was about truth revealed. Ethan had made himself large through lies, and now, with nothing but truth against him, he was made small. And as his last fragments of pride crumbled before her eyes, she knew there would be no coming back. His fall had only just begun. The collapse was not immediate, it came in waves, like cracks spreading through glass. Ethan's empire, built on charm and deception, began to split beneath the weight of truth. Business partners who once praised his brilliance now avoided his calls, their trust dissolving into silence. Allies who had defended him in boardrooms withdrew overnight, unwilling to tie their names to a man exposed as a fraud. Invitations vanished, meetings were cancelled, and his name, once gilded, became poison whispered in corners. The empire he believed untouchable had been hollow all along, and now it caved in with a quiet inevitability. At home, the mask slipped further. His girlfriend, once blinded by his confidence, saw only betrayal when the truth surfaced. The devotion she had paraded like a badge was replaced with disgust sharp enough to cut. She didn't wait for excuses or apologies. She didn't need to. The evidence had spoken more loudly than his practiced words ever could. Her departure was swift, her silence final, leaving him stranded in the wreckage of a life he thought he controlled. For the first time, Ethan was exposed and alone, his charm powerless against the truth. Word spread quickly, growing from whispers into a chorus of condemnation. The polished image he had so carefully maintained disintegrated beyond repair. Once, people leaned in when he entered a room. Now they recoiled, unwilling to be associated with his disgrace. No speech, no apology, no desperate smile could undo what had been revealed. His reputation, once a fortress, now lay in ruins scattered at his feet. There would be no rebuilding, No second act, he had gambled everything on lies, and the debt had come due. The shadows of the law lengthened soon. After, fraud was not just a moral failure, it was a legal one. Lawyers circled, sharp and relentless, picking apart the remnants of his career. Authorities began their slow, inevitable march toward him, each letter and summons another stone crushing his chest. The fortune he had flaunted so arrogantly now stood at risk of vanishing piece by piece until nothing remained. Ethan had once laughed at rules, believing himself above them. Now those same rules tightened like a noose around his neck. Through it all, she remained silent. She did not gloat, did not demand apologies, did not lower herself to the level of his cruelty. Her absence from the chaos spoke louder than words ever could. Dignity wrapped around her like armor, her silence a blade sharper than any insult. While Ethan scrambled to salvage scraps of his life, she walked away, her head high, her power intact. He had sought to make her feel small, but it was his own downfall that left him diminished, gasping in the ruins. The victory was complete, not through fury, but through patience and precision. She had not screamed, nor begged, nor lashed out. Her revenge had been crafted with intelligence, each move deliberate, each step unshakable. She had let him destroy himself, revealing that the strongest weapon against arrogance is not rage but control. In the end, she did not need to lift a hand, only the truth, sharpened by time, had done the work for her, and when the dust settled, a final irony lingered. He had once called her pathetic, mocking her silence as weakness, dismissing her as powerless. Yet it was that very silence that dismantled him piece by piece. His lies, not her patience, had been his undoing. She had not needed to strike him down. He had carried the seeds of his own destruction all along. As she closed this chapter of her life, she left him not with words, but with the echo of his own arrogance turned back against him. In the end, Ethan was right about only one thing. Someone would fall. He just never realized it would be him.